Checks and balances. Our federal government is organized in a relatively unique way. It's run by three separate yet equal branches of government. Each of these branches, they're the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. And each of these branches has certain checks on the other two branches in order to make sure that there is a balance of power between the three. We're going to go over that right now. The legislative branch. The legislative branch consists of the House of Representatives and the Senate, and its primary function is to make all laws for the federal government. All the nation's laws, not state laws, but the nation laws, U.S. laws, come from the legislative branch. The picture is the Capitol, and that's where both the House of Representatives and the Senate is located. Its primary function, like I said, makes laws. The executive branch consists of the President of the United States, his cabinet, and the entire bureaucracy that works directly under his command. Their primary function is to enforce the laws. So we have the legislative that makes the laws, the executive that enforces the laws. This picture is both the front and the back of the White House. The last branch is the judicial branch. It consists of all federal courts culminating in the Supreme Court of the United States. The Supreme Court has the last say in any court case. It is the judicial branch's job to interpret the laws. So we have those that make the laws, those that enforce the laws, and those that interpret the laws. Each has a set of checks for the others to make sure there's a balance of power. The legislative branch has these checks. The checks on the executive, the checks it has on the president, what Congress can do to hold the president at bay. It can fail to pass bills. If the president has made a campaign promise or has a special issue that he likes and he wants to try to pass certain laws to send the country in that direction, Congress can say, no, we don't want to do that, and just don't. The president can veto legislation. If something comes to the president's desk to be signed into law and he doesn't like it, he can say, no, I don't like it, and veto. But what Congress can do is they can override that veto. It's not easy to do, but it can be done. Legislative branch can also refuse to confirm executive appointments. The president has a ton of appointments to make, a ton. And most all of them require some kind of overview and consent from Congress. They can refuse to do that if they don't like what's going on. And as we've learned in January and through the history books, they can impeach the executive. If they think that the President of the United States has conducted himself in an illegal fashion, they can bring that impeachment up. They can try him if he is impeached. And if he is found guilty, he can be removed from office. Congress can refuse to ratify treaties. The president works very hard to make treaties, but it's the Senate that has to ratify it. A treaty is some kind of agreement with another nation, another foreign nation. We have all kinds of treaties. They're important for the head of state to be able to do. But again, if the president tries to arrange a treaty and Congress doesn't like what it's doing, they can refuse to ratify it. And they can also refuse to fund executive orders. Executive orders are something the president can do that are meant to clarify the way the president wants a certain law to be enforced. However, they've morphed over time, and executive orders kind of pretty much seem like they're just creating laws out of the blue. That's not their original intent, and sometimes the Congress can look at it. Congress has all the power of the purse strings. They have all the money. If they don't like what the president has put forth in an executive order, if it costs money, they can refuse to fund it. The president can say, I want to send so many agents from the FBI over here to do this. But if the Congress decides not to fund that move, if they don't give the money to allow it to happen, it simply won't. The legislative branch by far has more checks than the other two branches, but there's more of them. The checks that they have on the judiciary, they can eliminate courts. We have so many federal courts, so many district courts, and if a court is starting to act in a way that is beyond its scope of power or what its scope is supposed to be, Congress can just simply eliminate that court. Congress can also impeach judges. It's not just presidents, it's not just the executive that can be impeached, but it's also judges, justices. And in all honesty, far more justices have been impeached than presidents. Congress also sets the number of judges on the Supreme Court. There are 9 now. It hasn't always been 9. It may not be 9 in the future. They may decide it only needs to be 6 or 12. It's totally up to Congress. Odds are it will stay at 9. And Congress can refuse to confirm judicial appointments. It is the president's job to choose a judge, but they don't have to. Congress does not have to agree to that. They can just say no. It's kind of a check on both, but it's a check on the judiciary because they can just, judges have a tendency to lean one way or the other when it comes to politics. And if Congress doesn't like the way a certain judge leans, or if he or she leans too far one direction, they can simply not confirm that appointment. The executive branch, the president, has these checks on the legislative branch. The president can veto legislation. Like I said, if a bill becomes law if a bill is passed through Congress, comes to the president's desk to be signed into law, he can choose not to do that. And that is a veto. And that simply means I have the power, as the president, to keep that law from coming into play. It will not be a law for the United States because I said I don't like it. The president can also call special sessions of Congress. Congress is in session for only so long a year, but if there's a major emergency or if the president thinks more work needs to be done, the president can call another session of Congress and make all congressmen come back to Washington to do the job. And the president can also issue executive agreements with foreign nations. This isn't a treaty. It's kind of a way around the treaty. It's just kind of an agreement. It's not an official treaty, but oftentimes it acts pretty much like an official treaty. And the executive has these checks on the judiciary. They're not quite as clear, but they're important. The big one is that he can grant pardons. I mean, the biggest thing for the judiciary is finding out what is and is not constitutional and who is not guilty of certain crimes. And the president can simply say, I don't agree. I think this person's innocent, and pretty much pardons them for whatever crime they've been convicted of. And the president also, like I said before, appoints judges. Congress has to approve that appointment, but it's the president that actually chooses candidates for those positions. The judicial branch have the big checks. There aren't very many, but they're the very, very important ones. The biggest check that there is, the judicial branch can do to the legislative branch, is simply declare a law that they have passed to be unconstitutional. If the Supreme Court of the United States decides that a law is unconstitutional, it is no longer the law. It ceases to exist. It ceases to hold any power or influence. It's simply not the law anymore. The supreme law of the land is the Constitution. And the checks that the judicial branch has on the executive, they can declare executive orders unconstitutional. Like I said, the president can make an executive order, Congress can choose not to fund it, or the judicial branch can choose to decide that it's unconstitutional. And Supreme Court justices cannot be removed by the president. That's important because it's the president that chooses who sits on the Supreme Court with approval from Congress, but it is a lifetime appointment. They can't be fired. Once you're a justice in the Supreme Court, you get to be a justice in the Supreme Court until you choose not to be or until you die.